Hey, it's Mike from the Throttlestop. You Pontiac guys are in luck today. So we have a collection of Ram Air 5 stuff that most people never get to see. I brought in my good friends, Mark and Wade. As if you guys are Pontiac guys, you guys probably know them a little bit. How you doing?
Great. Nice to be here, Mike.
Good to see you, Mike. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. And so this is some of the stuff that a lot of people don't get to see. So this is a little bit more of our private collection stuff. And we wanted to share it by doing this video. A lot of it is so cool and so neat. And you guys, I get a lot of answers from you guys. I know a little bit, but you guys know a lot of it, in my opinion. Mark, you've been doing this a long time, the Ram Air 5 stuff, as is Wade.
Yeah, I'm kind of Wade's sidekick. We've been doing Ram Air 5 stuff. Quick story, we met at Thorstad Chevrolet in Madison on Park Street.
40 years ago.
40 years ago,
Yep.
We were just talking about it. We've both been involved in the Pontiac business world. I've helped him with things at BOP Engineering, things like that.
Okay.
And well, both our dads, real quick, were Mopar guys, but somehow we fell off the bandwagon. We ended up with Pontiacs.
Yeah.
And so here we are, and we met some older guys, and we just fell in love with the Ram Air 5 stuff. So
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Ram Air 5 stuff is such a hard thing to discuss. I not discuss, but it's almost such an elusive item. You know, most people start out as a D-port person. You know, you have a
Right.
Pontiac. You might have a 65 Catalina, and it had 3.9 4-barrel. And you're like, well, that was pretty fast, you know. Well, it has D-port. And then maybe you aspire to have a round port. But what got you guys into the tunnel port or the Ram Air 5 stuff?
Well, I think Mark and I are both voracious readers.
we are, and yeah, I mean, we grew up reading the magazine, Super Stock, things like that. I mean, another little caveat is when Wade was going from D-port into round port, he had a company, a little moniker called the Round Port Club, and did a bunch of things, sold a little entrepreneur, but he went from D-port into like Super Duty 455 stuff. And again, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, a lot of the Ram Air 5 stuff was developmental from Tom Nell and some of the guys that became the Super Duty 455. So his round port club and all of his experience going through things, I think that helped him graduate to the Ram Air 5 stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reading we've done and the mystery and the mystique of the Ram Air 5 is just phenomenal. You read about the stories of the engineers and how they developed this stuff and how it almost saw the light of day but never really did.
So close.
It's just great. I mean, we had engine unit numbers and block identification numbers on these blocks. As you're aware, you know, the Ram Air 5 stuff was meant to be used in NASCAR, used in SCCA racing, and also used in drag racing. And it became stillborn in 1970 when they canceled the project. And all these pieces kind of filtered out from crate engines that were sold through dealerships. The estimate is roughly 80 of those were sold. And then parts through the parts department, and then a lot of engineering pieces out the back door. And as you move through life and acquire these pieces, you're always looking for the next thing. It's the treasure hunt.
It is, and that's a big part of it. It's like the chase. It's like finding that next piece.
Yep.
And it's sitting in some guy's garage and who knows where, USA. But you get that piece, it's like Christmas.
Yep.
It's like,
Correct.
oh my God, I got a square coil.
Yeah,
this is the hardest
exactly.
thing. This is the hardest
square
thing to find.
coil.
And so some of you guys that are watching are like, well, what the hell is a square coil? These guys are going to tell you a little bit about it. No, that's really cool because, again, it's one of those things that a lot of people don't know about, and it was so close to coming to production. I always even reference like the air cleaner on a 70 Ram Air pan has got the clearance for the Holley carburetor.
Right.
The only Holley carburetor on any Pontiac motor was literally going to be Ram Air 5.
Yep.
Correct.
So they were
Yep.
so close to getting there into production, but they didn't, and it makes it more of a mystique, I guess, right? I mean, it's more unobtainium, it's more rare, it's more hard to find.
That's right.
It's such a cool thing. But I want to walk you guys through a couple of displays that we have out here for you guys.
Sure, that'd be great.
Thank you.
So the first one is this. Do you guys know anything about this?
Yeah, that was actually built by a friend of ours. It's based on the 303. So like we said a minute ago, the 303 was the SCCA racing, which is very
Right, because they had
applicable
a
here.
5-liter maximum displacement.
Right, 305 cubic inches,
Yes.
and we're in the heart of that now at the Throttlestop at
America.
Elkhart Lake Road America,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So that's totally fitting that motor is here. I believe there were 25 of those motors that were complete and assembled. Correct. And not very many pieces beyond that, and those motors were put out there, and frankly, they didn't do quite well in SCCA.
They failed, basically.
The story I had heard was that it was too much of volume. It was too big.
The intake
ports
boards
were too big.
Yeah, the intake boards were copied
and not
from
enough
the
cubes.
Right, they were copied from the Ford 427 tunnel port that won NASCAR in '66, I believe it was.
They've come to see the 9th renewal of the famous Daytona 500. There's a field of 50 great automobiles here this afternoon, and among the top contenders should be the Ford Fairlanes, the Plymouths, the Dodges, and a lonely Chevelle, which somehow managed to win the pole position.
John DeLorean wanted something similar for Pontiac, so they basically adapted that design to the Pontiac. And when that 305 cubic inch limit came in, not enough cubic inches, and even at high RPM to make those heads work. So they were quickly discarded for Ram Air 4 heads, and the racing continued. And so those motors are very difficult to find. And the one you have here, we're a little familiar with. It's not an original 303 block, but it's a 301 block, which was very similar. The 301 was produced later. And the builder used a 1958 370 forged steel crank to replicate the 303 crank. But the heart of that motor is clearly the intake manifold.
And the distributor as well, that
yes.
matches the intake.
Now, how many of these intakes have you seen in person?
I've only seen one besides this one in person. They made them in a couple different versions. They made them side by side and offset with the carbs, but there were very few, just a handful made, and very similar to the 302 Chevy manifold that people are familiar with. But that is a very, very rare piece and a great piece to build a motor around.
It really is, and that's what I love about it too, is that the intake manifold was really the whole design of like, oh, we got to build an engine for this thing.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And so to get a 301 turbo block and then put on Ram Air 5 heads and find a distributor. So you know a little bit something about the distributor.
Yeah, so the distributor, as far as I know, I've only seen two. That's possibly one of the ones that I owned or one similar. The gentleman that built this had 3 or 4 of those distributors, but that's about it. They're as rare, if not rarer, than the intake. And I can tell you, I've driven it through the city of Long Beach in a '69 Firebird, and it is one of the most amazing engines and cars I've ever driven as a package.
That's awesome.
It's just a great driver, and the guy that built it did a really good job on all the things he built Ram Air 5.
Yeah, and Tom left his footprint here on quite a bit of things that are here or in our possession. So we're really proud of that. We love this. It's such a cool package. It would have been extra cool to have a 303 block, but as you guys know, it's hard to find stuff that was hard to find when it was new.
They're very rare.
We're always looking for parts and pieces, so if anybody's got a little extra Ram Air 5 part laying in the corner that they want to part with, please send it our way. The next one we're going to touch base on is a really cool engine. This is a 1971 366 cubic inch. It has the 485-212 block.
Correct.
Ram Air 5. What do you think of that?
Well, like we had mentioned before, the 303 was made for the SCCA. The 366 was intended for NASCAR. And it, as you mentioned, used its own block. It was a 3 1/4 inch main. And it's the 212 block, which this particular motor has. And ironically, it suffered from the same problem that the 303 suffered from, not enough cubic inches for the size of the cylinder head. And so like the 303, the heads were quickly removed and replaced with Ram Air 4 heads to keep going in NASCAR. And it's interesting because some of the Ram Air 5 stashes that I've run across over the years ended up being NASCAR related. So it's a good place to find them. If you know old NASCAR guys that were Pontiac guys, sometimes you find some very interesting parts there. So, and this was a standard deck height, as opposed to the 303, which was a short deck. They did make the 303 in a tall deck as well, or what would be considered standard deck, but it didn't really change the success rate of that particular motor. So.
One of the other things I want to touch base on this one is the intake manifold. We were talking a few moments ago about the differences on the intake, which is a standard Pontiac Ram Air 5 4-barrel intake, but there's a couple variations.
Yeah, so basically, like we discussed, Mike and Wade have looked at, because a lot of this and some of these parts have DS numbers on them, and so a lot of it was developmental, but also they were learning as they went. So a neat piece for people that would come up to see this collection, that is what we would consider an early, not necessarily prototype, but an early production intake, where on the front of it, unlike this intake here or the intake on this car, a Pontiac engine is very torquey, needs a lot of pump shot to go from the primary to the secondary to get past that torque load. And so what they learned is when they went into the production with the production Holley carburetor, it comes with a 50 cc pump shooter, and they had to make a divot in this intake. If people come up and take a look, that intake does not have the divot, and so we consider that an early production or an early prototype style. This would have been what would have been considered the crate engine 400 or the production piece that Pontiac was intending to bring to
that is correct,
the general public.
And that's so interesting, because one little detail, the thing looks exactly the same, will have the same part number on it, have the same everything, but it's one little detail is a little different, and it's such a small window of time.
Correct.
Yeah.
You know, this is literally 1969-ish, you know.
Right.
That all this
668 was the development, started the development, and we've seen intakes, I've had them as late as April 70 casting dates. So.
Yeah, it's really just the little minutia that changed, and it's really kind of interesting to Pontiac guys. But even little things like the EO numbers, which is an engineering order number or a developmental series number, all those things were going on. So first, the engineers, as you guys are, would get the drawings and say, "Oh, this is what this is going to do," and they put a little stamp on that and a little. Then it went from there. It was like, well, that's working pretty good. Let's make it a developmental series. And then they do that again. And then it was going to end up in production if all went well. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
That's correct. And in Wade's collection, if I may speak on behalf of Wade, is that he has some developmental pieces that go back from Dr. Phil Bauman. And he has a dual quad intake on his 69 GTO Judge that was at McCacken, and it actually has where they were using pitot tubes and they were testing airflow, and he actually has that intake on his car running. So that's why we're like, if we can use the word Pontiac nerds.
Oh, please. I think I get called Pontiac nerds every once in a while.
Is that we like to read the history of, back in the day, but we also like to see and learn all the different stamping numbers, the different, the production codes, the date codes, the D numbers, the DS numbers, there's a lot of numbers on some what would be considered a production piece, like the two distributors and these two engines. That's what I think drives us as we get older. One is the history. Two is, like a mystery 427 Chevy engine, trying to find, all the history and find the parts.
And it's so hard to find. I always tell people this stuff was hard to find 50, 60 years ago. The internet definitely helps. And a lot of the stuff, as you guys will attest, the Ram Air 5 guys are kind of...
They're a little eccentric.
Keep
They're a lot eccentric.
Keep it within the Ram Air 5 guys. So stuff rarely comes up for sale. and it gets passed from guy to guy to guy.
Yeah.
And of course, we're always looking to acquire stuff. But let me show you something that no one's seen, and I know you guys have, but we would like to share this with everybody. This was a display piece that was built by our good friend Chris Taylor. And what we wanted to replicate, or kind of the vision of this, was this would be something that would be like at the Detroit Auto Show in 1969, showing you what the new Ram Air 5 package would be. What's your first impression of something like this?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. It's like you say, it models the old cutaways that they did back in the day. Here you've got the entire block cutaway, so people can see the crankshaft, see the Ram Air 5 connecting rods, et cetera, et cetera. It's a great piece, Mike.
Yeah, it really is, Mike, because it also then, you know, for kids that are 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, if you look at a new car, you can't even see the engine. And here they are, and they're like going to point, and they're going to say, "Daddy, what is that?" Or "Mommy, what is that?" And all of a sudden you can see a connecting rod, a crankshaft. So the display, hats off to Chris, your assembler and your display. It's just a beautiful concept that again goes back to the history of the auto shows in the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah, and some of this stuff is assembled to really just, again, showcase what it was, and, you know, having the stands on the valve cover so you can get a glimpse at what the heads were looking like, and the, you know, the push rod tubes, and of course these are developmental series heads. The ignition system, you want to touch on that?
Sure, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So the Ram Air 5 used its own ignition system. The Oldsmobile also used a similar system. It was a capacitive discharge system. For the people today, they more know it as an MSD box, but it was made by Delco. You can see one here. They used a special coil that had different windings in it for the capacitive discharge ignition. You can see you've got one there. They also made the CD coil in a round, traditional style coil, but the Ram Air 5 was really spec'd for that particular coil, and it's a square epoxy coil that you referenced earlier. Mm-hmm. Very, very difficult to find. They were available, but not many survived, and so they're hard to find. And then it uses a bobbin type setup inside the distributor as well that fits that. And it's great to see an engine not only that is complete, but also has the correct ignition pieces, because those are often overlooked. And then also the carburetor you were describing earlier there, that is a correct Ram Air 5 carburetor. With the correct Holley list number, 4545 for a 4-speed. And if you look closely at it across the horn where the numbers are typically listed, you also see a Pontiac part number on there, which is
I'm learning, because I didn't know that.
Yeah, the top number on there is the Pontiac part number. So they also are very difficult to find. You find them pieced together sometimes, and to find all the original pieces is really tough. You also alluded, I want to make a comment, you alluded earlier to the pushrod tube. One thing that's really unique about the Ram Air 5 is that the pushrod tube runs right through the middle of the intake port. And that was much, again, like the Ford tunnel port. The Pontiac did it in the cylinder head, where the Ford did it, the tube, in the intake manifold. But that allowed for a very large port. And in addition to that, there was no room. This is what we call a divorced exhaust. The camshaft space is the same, but the intake and exhaust lobes were all in different places. So the exhaust ports were separated out, unlike a traditional Pontiac that has them together in the middle. And also with that, and you'll see on the intake manifold that there's no heat crossover for the carburetor, because there just wasn't room to do it. So clearly the engineers had racing in mind when they developed these pieces.
All right, guys, I could talk about this Ram Air 5 stuff all day. I do want to thank you guys for coming out. Mark,
Mike,
Wade.
Appreciate it.
Again, thank you guys for tuning in and checking out the 303, 366, the 400 display. I could talk about this stuff all day. I want you guys to like, subscribe, have some questions and comments, send them our way. We love seeing all that feedback. Again, I'm Mike from the Throttlestop. We are driven by Ram Air 5 passion.